And we are so pleased and so thrilled that Dr. Carter would come from Creation Ministries International and be here with us in this chapel. And some of you heard him today in the class just before this, and some of you heard him last night at the local Charleston church. But would you give him a great Charleston Faith Bible College International welcome to this pulpit today? Thank you. God bless you, Brother Carter.
Well, good morning, everybody. Going back over here, get my water bottle. Okay. My name is Robert Carter. I am a scientist, and I am a Christian, and I'm here to expound upon some curveballs. I'm not going to give you a standard Bible lecture or standard science lecture. I'm actually going to ask you a bunch of difficult questions because it's fun. The goal here is to learn better how to grapple with some of the difficult questions, because we get a lot of difficult questions. But if we understand the psychology and the philosophy behind the question, we will have an advantage over the questioner. In fact, we might get an advantage over our own questions and figure them out. Oh, I've thought that because of this, but really my starting point was wrong. So all I'm going to do is throw you a bunch of curveballs. But before we get there, I have to introduce my ministry. I work for Creation Ministries International. I have worked for them for 14 years. I am one of about 30 speakers we have stationed around the world, and we visit about 1,300 churches and schools every year. That's a lot of work. In fact, I'm on the road every other weekend, all year long. But it's fun, and I love it, and I get to meet all these cool people like you. The problem is I don't get to meet them more than once. So, if you would like to know more about Creation Ministries, our website is easy to remember. It's creation.com. And I know that you're going through the Genesis account, which I'm actually tickled pink to hear that. That was 2 years that took us to do that. It was a phenomenal amount of work. We actually built a soundstage in our warehouse, so we had a movie studio to film that. And we had a full-time videographer for 2 years working on that, and all of our speakers, it kicked our tail. But I think the project, in the end, was pretty good. So you know a little bit about us. But if you want to know more, and you would like to plug into some of the information that we're constantly producing, turn on, Carter. There we go. Technology. If you'd like to plug into some of the information we're constantly producing, let me recommend our email newsletter. It's perfectly free. It's not spam. It's once a week. We'll identify a couple of interesting things. We'll put them into an email, and we send them out. And we just love counting the number of people that click on the link that we sent it to. Sometimes a lot more people click the link than the number we sent it to. That's called going viral. And that's always the goal, but it doesn't always happen. But we're constantly working on it. If you'd like to get our newsletter, here's what our sign-up form looks like. We ask for name and email address and a zip code. No big deal. Those are going around now, and I'm going to talk, though. So my first question for you. How do you know what you know? You think you know stuff? How do you know it? How confident are you that it's true? Well, first of all, you realize you have to assume that you're awake. You have to assume that I'm not a robot. You have to assume that the universe existed yesterday and the aliens didn't create it yesterday and implant false memories in your mind. So philosophically, we have to make these grand assumptions about the universe before we even start asking questions like this. But there's a problem. Yeah, we can use our brains to figure things out. Okay, this is great. But you're in school. You know what it's like to learn stuff. You know the drinking from a fire hose analogy? I mean, you're feeling it right now. You don't even remember what you learned yesterday because you took a test and it's already out of your brain. But here's a massive problem with modern society. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And we don't have time, as we're learning, especially as students, to stop and figure out what they're telling me is true or not. I just got to memorize it for my test. And so we often get stuff stuck in our head that's false. Not at this school. But from society at large, things pop in our brain, and how do you get them out again? And there are some people in this world who speak very confidently, and they're talking nonsense. But we don't have enough information in our own minds to challenge their authority. And here's the worst part of all. You tend to hang around with people that are like you. Notice you're going to a Christian college. How many atheists do you hang around with every day? Probably not many. People naturally hang around with people that think like they do, maybe eat the same foods, listen to the same music, or maybe the same age. We all have our little groups. This is human nature. For better or for worse, that's the way we are. But YouTube does it to us. And Facebook does it for us. And Google knows who you are. They put you in a little bin, and when you Google, they will feed you information based on your prior profile. So this idea that we segregate ourselves is being done to us by technology. Oh, great. So how do you find information? The information you're being fed depends upon the information you've already consumed. How do you know what you know? Well, one way we do this is we approach it with science. Now, if you saw my lecture last night, this is going to be a very brief recapitulation of one section, but I have to say it again, just so everyone else here hears this. We have to approach these things with science, but science is difficult because science has multiple definitions. One definition or one form of science is called operational science. It deals with how things work today. And that type of thinking has led to development of all of our technology. All of it. These lights, these computer systems, this microphone, this tablet that I've got in front of me. This is called operational science, figuring out how things work today, right now. Has nothing to do with evolution. Has nothing to do with deep time. Has nothing to do with millions of years. And this type of thinking was pioneered by Christian scientists. Not Christian Science. Scientists who were Christians. Let's say it that way. Men like Johann Kepler, the great astronomer who discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion that NASA used to fly things around the solar system today. And he said of his work, it was like thinking God's thoughts after him. Science is an act of worship when put in its proper context. In fact, the early modern scientists who laid down the laws of science, almost all of them were Christians. Some of them wrote more about theology than they did about science. But the reason they pursued this is because they thought that the universe operates like a clock, because the ultimate lawgiver, who never does anything against his own nature, would have created a universe that operates according to law. They thought the universe behaves like with law because of God's nature. Science comes from philosophy. Do you know that? I can prove it. There's several people in this room. I have one too. I have a PhD. What does that stand for? Yeah, piled higher and deeper. No. Not post-hole digger. Come on. PhD. What does that stand for? A what? A doctor of philosophy? I thought I was a scientist. Is there a philosophy involved in my training? Absolutely. It's a philosophy called naturalism. An ism is a belief, right? Okay, you learn lots of isms in your training here. What is naturalism? It's a belief that nature is all there is. It's a belief that everything that's ever happened anywhere in the entire universe can be explained by the laws of physics and chance and probability. That's called naturalism. There is a philosophical assumption and belief at the core of our scientific training today. And no scientist ever taught that. I've never heard anyone say that. But it's absolutely true. But I'm not a naturalist. I'm a theist. Consider Hebrews 11:3. By faith we understand the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Put that in context here. Yeah, it is a faith proposition to believe that God created the universe. But you know what? It's a faith proposition to believe that nature is all there is. It is philosophy. This whole creation evolution debate, we're not arguing science, we're arguing philosophy. I just pulled the curtain back. You can now see behind the curtain. If you can keep this thought in your mind as you're writing and discussing and with other people and sharing your faith with other people, we have a tremendous advantage because most people don't even know what I just told you. This is a spiritual battle. But if you tell people that, they'll think you're crazy. Because this is a spiritual battle. Now, there are other forms of science. One other form, one very, very important form, is called historical science. It's when you reach back into the past and try to explain something that happened that you have no idea, you never saw it. You had a lot of creativity, a lot of good thinking, a lot of imagination in historical science. But how many times has history happened? Once. Therefore, we can't test it, we can't repeat it. It's not operational science. We're not arguing over the boiling point of water, or the force of gravity, or the speed of light. Well, some of the speed of light, but not really. We're arguing over, did humans have a common ancestor with the fish that crawled out of an ocean 500 million years ago? That's a big deal. We're arguing over how old the universe is, not if the universe exists. Where did the universe come from, not how does the universe work. How it works, operational. Where did it come from, historical. Okay? This next slide, this took me decades to figure what I'm about to show you. 3 sentences. True, the universe was created. Also true, the universe is naturalistic. I didn't say naturalism is true. I said the universe is naturalistic, as in it operates like a clock. If I set up an experiment in my laboratory and go home, when I come back in the morning, I don't expect that pixies from the garden came in and rearranged my test tubes. It's not like Zeus hates me and he throws a little lightning bolt down in the middle of the night to fry my computer. No, the universe is trustable because it came from a trustable source, the God of the Bible. Under naturalism, there actually is no reason to trust the universe. Except from my experience, every time I pick something up and drop it, I can experiment on the force of gravity. But so what? That's only you. You are not everywhere in the universe, and you're not all people, and you haven't always lived. You cannot know, go back to the beginning, that the laws of science are inviolate. And yet, the assumption of naturalism is that is absolutely true. More philosophy. Okay? Naturalism, the ism part, is a wonderful science in the laboratory. It works incredibly well. This is why science was stillborn in Greece, in ancient Rome, in ancient Egypt, in any place you go into the Eastern world. I mean, Buddhism, they're teaching that the universe is a mirage. You can't do science in that sort of a thing. So, the reason that naturalism works in the laboratory is because God. But naturalism is a lousy science of origins. Again, creation-evolution debate. Christians invented naturalism. But then 100 years later, 200 years later, the scientists, actually the philosophers, not the scientists yet, 1700s, the philosophers started saying, oh, naturalism is true, but if you apply strict naturalism, you don't need God for anything. That's the Big Bang today. From the Big Bang until today, God is irrelevant in a naturalistic world. We talked about this at length in our Evolution's Achilles Heels book and documentary. We have them on tables there. We can get some snippets online. What we did was we listed all the things that evolution cannot answer. And we interviewed a whole bunch of PhD Bible-believing scientists who said, yeah, in my nerdy field of expertise, this is what evolution cannot address. We call them Evolution's Achilles Heels. You grammar snobs, you'll notice the apostrophe S, S apostrophe S. Okay, all right, thank you. Actually, I came up with that title before we even started doing anything. I was like, oh, look at this. Learned that in 6th grade. All right, let me give you another big idea. What if science is just a way of thinking? You know, I information coming at me, and I'm taking it, you've heard the phrase worldview, obviously, right? I'm trying to put into my scientific worldview. Trying to take all this stuff and kind of put pieces together and make it make sense according to some way that I think. So science could be an interpretive filter of reality. Is that okay? Imagine that reality is these vertical red lines. Imagine that your way of thinking is the gray lines. Can you see that if your thinking is wonky, you still might get some things right? Can you see that? Evolution. Evolution absolutely gets things right. It gets a lot of things right. They make a lot of predictions. If evolution is true, then this and this and this should be true. That's true. But what you really rarely hear is an evolutionist talking about something that doesn't fit evolutionary theory. It doesn't matter how many facts line up with your theory. That's irrelevant. That's not how science works. Science is a negative process. You try to disprove things, you can't prove anything. You can't even disprove things, but you can usually make a pretty good case that something's wrong. That's why we know, I say no, it's not a debate, that the earth actually is a sphere. That's why we know the earth goes around the sun. Okay. By the way, if you Google refuting flat earth, I have the #1 Google hit. It took forever to write that article. It started off as a 32-page Word document, and when we posted it, we had to actually put a table of contents in the beginning with hyperlinks, and then it got longer. Because I'm a nerd, and I like thinking about things, and it's just a fast, okay, tangent here. Science conspiracy theories is not creationism. There are some creationists who are conspiracy theorists, and I don't like their versions of creationism, but it's not conspiracy theory. But science conspiracy theories are the things that we used to do at Georgia Tech, sitting around, and we just throw out, hey, what about this? And we laugh at how ridiculous a statement is. And now you see it on a meme on a Facebook post. Okay. I am not, and I would never claim that my science is perfectly aligned with reality. That would be arrogance. I would never do that. But can you see, closer you get your way of thinking to the way things really work, the more you'll get right in science? Okay. This is a powerful concept in science. This is why most scientists believe that we've moved past creationism, because of how much evolutionary theory gets right. But usually what they're doing is painting a false picture of what creationism predicts. I think we get a lot more right, and I think we have a lot better answers. But you'll never hear them say that. Because also in science is politics. How many times have you heard a politician tell the truth? Okay, scientists are people too. And there's money and professions and reputations on the table. We are not immune to social pressures. There's no ivory tower. All right, let me ask you a question. What is evolution? What is evolution? Someone define it. Changing one kind of creature into another kind of creature. Okay. Remember in class I said we have an article called Arguments We Think a Creationist Should Not Use? The difference between micro and macroevolution is on that list. And the reason is this. The evolutionist doesn't make a distinction. Charles Darwin said, I see a little bit of change. Give me millions of years, and I see no limit to the amount of change. So micro is just a micro version of macro. To them, it's the same thing. So it's an argument that goes nowhere. Thank you, though. Most of the time, if you look at a textbook, or even YouTube videos of famous scientists, they'll say, oh, evolution's just changed over time. Is that true? The definition is evolution means change. But is the definition of evolution change over time? No, because I'm a creationist and I believe in change over time. You ever see a chihuahua? Do you know what a chihuahua is? It's a gray wolf. It's not a red wolf, it's not a coyote, it's not an African jackal. By the way, all those things can interbreed, one created kind. But we took gray wolves and made all the breeds of dogs in the world today. Obviously, things change over time. I'm looking at you in this audience. There's a lot of different skin colors. We all came from Noah and his family. Where do skin colors come from? Well, this is a broken version of the SCL something 1 gene on the end of chromosome 16. I have 2 identical versions, which means I'm inbred. You Europeans, you lost diversity. That's why Europeans are this color. It's easy to account for that in a few thousand years. Oh, if you get me on European genetics or African genetics or Indian genetics, but that's a whole nother talk. Oh, well. Change happens. The Bible does not teach fixity of species. Aristotle taught fixity of species. Darwin wasn't arguing against the Bible, he was arguing against Greek philosophy. You know that thing about Jacob and the sheep? Change over time, right there, through selective breeding, right there. By the way, if you're confused about that, the white color of the sheep is actually dominant. Which is why there could be the streaked and speckled ones hiding in the gene pool of the white flock after Laban took all the streaked and speckled ones away. Jacob's like, whatever, they're still here. Okay. If you're going to define evolution, you have to use the phrase common ancestry. Evolution is a belief that enough change over enough time can explain the common ancestry of all things. That is a valid definition of evolution. I don't believe it, but that is a valid definition. Is it true? What if all the changes go downhill? What if the change is circular? Can we actually see the right types of changes in the natural world to support long-term evolution? That's a good question. But before I get there, let me explain one more concept. There's another way to define evolution. If you take biology, I'm a biologist, I study living things. If you take biology and you apply to that the philosophy of naturalism, you will get evolution every time. But if you take biology and apply to that the philosophy of theism, you will get some form of creation, depending on your view of theism. Now, I happen to believe in the God of the Bible, and I happen to read the Bible, and I know what it says, and you know what? It's telling me creation a few thousand years ago from nothing. If you're struggling with that, can I encourage you to keep struggling? It is worth wrestling with these questions. I didn't always believe this. It took me a long time. And even after I became a creationist, 10 years later, I didn't even know if the Bible's true anymore. And very slowly, God built me back up, one step at a time. How? I was helping out at a youth group when I was in grad school in Miami, and the youth minister went to a different church. It's actually a Methodist church of all places. Me, the arch conservative, right? And he asked me to come and start his college group. I had no business being there. And I didn't know what to do, so we studied through Evidence That Demands a Verdict and The Case for Christ, and I studied myself into Christianity. Or God studied me into Christianity. One of my girls wrote me on Facebook. She's now probably 40. I mean, I was 5 or 8 years older than these college kids. And she wrote me, she was, Rob, thank you so much. Every week I came to class, and it was like, you were answering the question that I was asking. And I wrote her back and said, are you kidding? That was the question I was asking. All right. Next question. What is natural selection? Is natural selection evolution? Does natural selection prove evolution? You'll hear things like that. Those are invalid. First of all, natural selection isn't magic. Nature is not alive. Nobody believes that nature has a brain and is doing selecting. That's no. No one has ever said that. But some creationists say that evolutionists teach it. It's not true. It's also not survival of the fittest. Now, Charles Darwin's cousin invented that phrase because he didn't like the phrase natural selection. But survival of the fittest doesn't work either. Because who's the most fit? Is it the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the smartest, the one with the best eyesight, the best reflexes? Who's the most fit? There's actually a definition of this in evolutionary theory. Do you know what it is? It's the one who has the most number of offspring. Christians win. In evolutionary terminology, The most fit is the one who has the most number of offspring. And it's obvious. In other words, it's not circular, but it's reflective. It's the one who's best fit to the environment obviously will thrive in that environment. Let me give you a thought. Imagine that there's a mountain. And this mountain is covered with oak trees. And the top of the mountain is very dry, and there's a marshy, rivery area at the bottom. And it's oak trees the whole way. But in this oak tree population, there's different genes. Some of the genes help the oak trees tolerate dry roots, and some of the genes help the oak trees tolerate wet roots. Let's say an oak tree lives 100 years and dies. And over 1,000 years, we get 10 generations of oak trees. And initially, these genes are spread out through the entire mountainside. After 1,000 years, what do you think the gene pool is going to look like on top of the mountain? Who had more acorns? The oak trees that could tolerate dry roots. At the bottom of the mountain, who had more acorns every year? The oak trees that could tolerate wet roots. That's obvious. It's not about life and death. It has nothing to do with life and death. Yeah, salmon swim upstream, they spawn, and they die. But I'm a coral reef ecologist. Some of my corals were 3,000 years old, and they spawned every year and let out millions of eggs. And the bigger they got, the more eggs they released. It's not about life or death. But everything Darwin wrote was couched in terminology of life and death, even though he knew it wasn't about life and death. Why? Because Charles Darwin, even though he never ran a single experiment his entire life, no controlled experiment, he was a philosopher. And a good one. Actually, a bad one, but a good one, because so many people believed him. Let me give you an example of natural selection. You ever hear of antibiotic resistance? Bacteria. Isn't that proof of evolution? Two different opinions in the same room. This is cool. You've probably heard as proof of evolution, right? Here's two bacteria. The one on the right is a mutant. The one on the left is normal. The one on the left has a normal-sized pore. Food, the little green things can go in, but so can that purple antibiotic. On the right, the antibiotic doesn't fit, and the food sometimes goes in, but sometimes doesn't, so he grows very slowly. Add whoa. Wait a minute, the mutant survived. The healthy cell died. Almost every case of antibiotic resistance, the antibiotic resistance gene causes a broken pore or something like that. Antibiotic resistant bacteria grow slowly. They're decrepit. They're broken. But it's better to grow slowly than to die. You people with African ancestry, you know that in Central Africa, there's a very high rate of something called sickle cell anemia. Right? It's a bad disease. It hurts people. It's painful. But what happens is that there's a single amino acid change in the hemoglobin molecule that changes the hemoglobin such that the hemoglobins can stick together and make crystals. And so your red blood cells, they get sickles, crystals in them, and it gets stuck in your joints, and they get stuck in your capillaries. Ow, it hurts. But what lives inside red blood cells? The malaria parasite. They get shredded by the crystals. So what is it? Is it better to be dead or to carry a disease that hurts? So natural selection over many generations has amplified this gene to a large fraction of the Central African population carries sickle cell anemia because it's beneficial even though it's a bad mutation. Because you see, the only rule is who has the most offspring. It doesn't matter how you get there. In all these classic cases of evolution that we see downhill change. For evolution to be true, not only do we need uphill change, but that's actually irrelevant. We need the most improbable things that you can even imagine happen. Like, an organism learns how to grab a photon, and then using quantum tunneling, it takes that photon and makes a hydrogen ion gradient, and then while that's happening, it's taking this molecule called ADP, which doesn't even exist in nature, and it bonds it to a phosphate, which is incredibly rare in nature, and it sticks them together to make this thing called ATP. Why would anything ever evolve that process? Why on earth would you ever do that? Because until you get the end point, it's worthless. Meanwhile, at the same time, they're taking, so I just gave you mitochondria instead of chlorophyll in plants, so you get the idea. I just skipped between two massive biochemical pathways and didn't realize it. So if you're watching online, that was a mistake. Anyway. Let me give you another idea. I did this in class earlier, so some of you have seen this. I call this a two worlds fallacy. Is it true that everything that supports evolution disproves creation? Is it true that if I find facts that support creation, I can disprove evolution? Yes and no. Here's the problem. Two competing theories aren't independent of one another. They're claiming the same space. I was involved in a lawsuit. Not me, but I was called in as an expert witness. PBS had produced a documentary on evolution one year, and they showed it in public school classrooms all over the country. It was about 10 years ago. And in that documentary, they mocked Christianity, which is illegal, because the Supreme Court has said many times that all education must be religiously neutral. That's how they got rid of prayer in schools. But turn it around, you can't mock Christianity, you have to be neutral. And so this girl's like, I'm going to do a lawsuit. And so I was called in for this conference. And, Michael Behe was there, and some other really important people there. And they asked me my role was to watch the documentary and analyze the science to see what they got wrong. They got nothing wrong. Every single thing they said, I agreed with. And their conclusion was, therefore, evolution is true. This is Charles Darwin's strategy. Exactly what he did. What he did was, and what they did was, they gave the students what I call non-discriminating information. It's information you can't use to decide between two theories because both theories claim it as their own. Natural selection is one of them. Change over time is one of them. There's all these things that they use as their examples, and it was completely irrelevant. But because this is true, and 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 they all fit evolution, therefore, student, obviously evolution is true. Can you see the power of that form of reasoning? That is brilliant. We need to be able to identify that, or we get caught up in it too. This applies to doctrinal discussions. This applies to theological discussions. This applies to scientific. This applies to politics. Every aspect of our lives, we're being fed a bunch of stuff with people. You understand that when someone gives you a lecture, they're trying to get you to draw a conclusion, right? And that they're pre-selecting the information that they're presenting to their audience because they want their audience to get somewhere. Okay. We have to watch for that. We also have to watch it for ourselves also. I've actually surprised myself several times when I realized I was doing this myself. All humans do it. Back in the day, what time are we stopping? 20 what? 20 after? Oh, in 20 more minutes? Now give me a time. I need a time.
I need a time,
12:30? Okay, good. Because I'm only about a quarter of the way through. I actually had no plan for where to end. I'm just going to skip to the end at the end. Because literally, I just want to paint big pictures and see where they go. Because this is really fun, and I love this sort of a give and take sort of a thought process. This is a graph that one of my friends did in an article he wrote. It's basically explaining Darwin's power to explain life. Back in the 1800s, when they didn't know anything about the cell was simple. If life is simple, evolution might be possible. Oh, because you can modify simple things. If life is complicated, evolution grinds to a halt. I can modify this little computery thing I got right here in a couple of ways. Most of the modifications will destroy it. But I can change a few things within the design specifications. When God created life, he said, here's my design, here's my tolerance levels. If you exceed that, you die. But there's plenty of ways within those design specifications for variability to appear, even through mutation. Oh. The more complex life becomes, the less probable evolution is. In my career, I have watched our understanding of biological complexity go into the stratosphere. Life is nothing but complexity. Therefore, Darwin's power to explain it has dropped to the floor. Okay? So what do professors do with this? There are a lot of professors my age, growing up now, who are not Darwinists anymore. Are they creationists? No. They'll say things like, Gaia. The universe is conscious. Therefore, consciousness just comes out of the fabric of the universe. Or, emergent complexity. The universe has complexity woven into its very fabric, so complex structures just naturally arise. This sounds really metaphysical, doesn't it? Or, aliens did it. Yeah, it's called intelligent design. It's also called pushing the buck. Or, is that the right phrase? Passing the buck. Sorry, thank you. In other words, if aliens did it, then the next question is great, who made the aliens? Because evolutionists, you only have 13.8 billion years. And if life takes 5 or 6 billion years to evolve, you're toast. So they don't really have an answer, and we see all these very metaphysical explanations of an obviously reality that Darwinian evolution does not hold water anymore. Let me give you an example of technology in the cell, not television. That there on the television screen is a nucleotide. It's one of the 4 letters in DNA. There's DNA. Let's take this DNA and make a protein. And this is going to be the most oversimplified thing you can ever see. Oh, that thing is zipped by, that is a polymerase. It is opening up the DNA strand and sucking nucleotides in one end, we're not showing you how, and matching them up, we're not showing you how. Matching one nucleotide onto one of the strands only of the DNA. Now when it gets to the end, what's called RNA, this red thing, this RNA, is going to kick off. We're not showing you how. But this RNA now has a 4-letter code. 4-letter alphabet, and we're going to spell out a 20-letter protein. How do we do that? We have to translate from one language to another. And we use these purple things, not really purple in real life, they're called transfer RNAs. And they go into something called the ribosome, this machine that does error correcting, can back up and fix things if it makes a mistake. Whoa. What it does is it takes the transfer RNAs and matches 3 letters at the bottom of transfer RNA to 3 letters in DNA, or RNA. And at the top of it are amino acids that pop off and make a growing protein strand. But most proteins will self-destruct. They'll fold, they fold incorrectly. And so we need these other molecules, these other proteins manufactured in the same process. These are called chaperones. They grab onto that unfolded protein strand and they don't let it fold. By the way, every step I'm showing you here is Nobel Prizes, PhD dissertations, and millions of dollars of research. This take us a long time to figure this out. But what they do is the chaperones bring the unfolded protein strand to this watermelon-shaped molecule, so we call it a green. It's called a chaperonin. We don't know how it works. But we know the protein goes in one end and gets folded. If it gets folded wrong, it chops it up. So error correcting again. And at the other end, out pops. We just went from a 4-letter DNA language, linear, to a 20-letter protein language in 3 dimensions. And the function of the protein has no chemical relationship to the letters of DNA. The earliest possible life must have gone through this process. How did life know how to do it before it could do it? What if this is part of the ATP synthase machine that's coded in a protein, that's coded in DNA, manufactured it into a protein using ATP in order to make the ATP synthase, in order to make ATP so that you can actually do it again. What came first? You got a three-way chicken and egg problem there. Psalm 92:4. For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your work. At the works of your hands I sing for joy. I referred to this verse often in graduate school as I was slaving away in the laboratory, hating life, wanting to see the sun at least once this week. You know what it's like up here. Anyway, but I was in Miami. No beach for me. No, that's not the way it works. You're in graduate school, man. You got to work. Why? Because you want those little letters after your name. Because when that happens, doors open up. That's why we're in school. Why you're going through all this pain and suffering? Because doors open up at the end that would never have opened beforehand. You can still be a garbage man. You can still flip burgers. But the people flipping burgers can't do what you might be able to do. Okay. You ever hear that creationism is not science? You ever hear creationism is not testable? You ever see Nacho Libre? I believe in science. Sorry. Is it true that creation is not testable? No. Let's throw a couple tests at it. First, remember a two-circle illustration. A lot of the so-called tests are invalid because they don't split between the two things. But the Bible makes a very specific claim. One man is the ancestor of all people. One woman is the ancestor of all people. And there's no common ancestors between humans and chimpanzees. That doesn't say that directly, but it's a direct inference, because if God made Adam and Eve from dirt, we're not related to monkeys. Okay. Scientifically, that is absolutely true. If we look at all the Y chromosomes in this world, in fact, where's the guy from Cameroon? There you are. We were talking earlier. This is really, really, really cool. Because even though he has very dark skin and I have light skin, my Y chromosome is found in Cameroon. And my Y chromosome family is fairly young. My peeps, we didn't get to Europe. Right now, my group is 80% of European men. But we didn't arrive in Europe until the Bronze Age. Think Trojan War. Just before King David, maybe. Bronze Age. Europeans weren't in Europe yet. We were in Central Asia, north of the Caspian Sea. And yet there's people, my great-great-grandfather comes from Ireland. And he's a Carter. I don't know how I have an English name and Irish ancestry. I never figured that out. But there are people in Ireland with other Y chromosomes from a totally different group on the family tree. He and I, could be more closely related than I would be to my great-great-grandfather's next-door neighbor in Ireland. What's a race? I'm a geneticist. I can't define it. They don't exist. Biblically, they don't exist either, but that's my racist talk. It's a whole nother, man. The Bible, you can also make an inference from Scripture. If you start from two people, you can't have a lot of genetic diversity. The Bible doesn't say how many animals God created. I imagine he created a functional ecology of millions of elephants, not just two. Millions of chimpanzees, not just two. I'm guessing, I don't know. But there are 7 to 8 times more genetic diversity within chimpanzees than within the 7 billion people on this planet. We are shockingly similar. So all the racist comments that Darwin and his disciples made for 100 and more years are completely wrong. The evolutionists made direct predictions about humanity. Every single thing they said for 150 maybe years is in the dust basket. It's wrong. That is cool. We have new arguments now. And actually what happens is science is finally caught up with Scripture. The Bible also says there's been a single dispersal of people across the planet after the Tower of Babel. The evolutionist calls that out of Africa. Same pattern. But they had the origin in Africa because they can't put it in the Middle East. I talk about that in Mitochondria Leaving the Three Daughters of Noah out there, or over there. There's an hour-long presentation on that one slide. If you want more info, we have tons. By the way, our website is 100% free. I'm not asking you to buy stuff here today. I'm not. Oh, hey, can someone bring me one of those red books? Thank you, sir. We have a pile of these books. I don't want to take them home with me. So my boss told me that I could sell these at our cost. This is the Creation Answers book. It answers 99% of all the questions we get. So chapters on, does God exist? Really 6 days? What about gap theory? What about carbon dating? How do we see distant starlight in a young universe? Who's Cain's wife? What about the global flood? What about dinosaurs? This is a $15 book, and I'm going to sell it to you for $5. Now, if you're an adult and you have a paycheck, $15. But any student, as many as you want, $5. I mean, it costs me money to ship them home, and so I can bless you while you're blessing me. Okay, 6 minutes. How many of you have seen this? The Miller-Urey experiment. Didn't that prove the origin of life is true from random chemicals? I mean, Darwin is the guy who thought he said maybe life evolved in some warm little pond. He's the person who thought of something like this. What they did back in the 50s, they took simple gases, reacted them in a spark chamber, and cooled them off. What they showed was that simple molecules randomly reacted can produce simple molecules. But some of those molecules they produce are what we produce in life. The simple things we produce, the simple amino acids were there. Okay. None of the complex amino acids, no nucleotides, no sugars, and even better than that, no chains of things. So first of all, that system does not give us complex molecules. All life is based on very complex molecules, very improbable molecules, molecules you don't find in random chemistry. But it's even better than that. All life depends upon long polymers, DNA. You have 6 feet of DNA inside every one of your cells. That's a very long molecule. But DNA breaks down in the presence of water. So if you just put nucleotides in something and warm it up and let them react and stick together, they break apart faster than they stick together. So if you take all the nucleotides and let them sit there for a year and then pull them all out, you might find 2 of them stuck together. You might find 3 of them stuck together in a chain. You wouldn't even find 4. You have 3 billion letters of DNA in your cell. Simple bacteria have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of letters of DNA. The simplest possible life would have required at least tens, if not hundreds of thousands of letters just to get life to start. But that doesn't even matter. I will even give the evolutionist, I'll give you millions of years. I'll give you a source of nucleotides. I'll give you a source of sugars, source of amino acids, even though you don't have it. I'll give it to you. I'll let you put all the things. I'll let you take something that's alive and put it in a blender, like a frog, and pour it in something and let it sit in a warm little corner of your lab for 1 million years. You're still not going to get life. Because life requires information, by definition. You have a computer program inside your cells. It's called the human genome. It's the most complex computer program we've ever seen. We thought it was junk DNA 20 years ago, back in the Stone Ages of genetics. Okay, Stone Ages. I was almost late this morning because I got an email from Dante Labs. I just had my genome sequenced. $189. 1 month. It took the U.S. government $3 billion in 10 years to sequence the first human genome. Personal genetics is today. A month, 180 is a Black Friday special. How could I turn it down? So my 3 billion letters are now sequenced, and I have them, literally, I downloaded it on my laptop, which is up there. It's super boring. It's just ATTGCCAACC. But for me, I can't wait. Anyway. So the origin of life from random stuff, no. Chemistry tells us that. Physics tells us that. Probability tells us that. And all the information theory stuff coming from computer science says no. Evolution can't even start. But once we have life, we can modify it. because the universe is naturalistic and created at the same time. I should probably end right there. Let's see. Skip that. Where am I? Oh, all the quotes from Darwin, all the quotes from the evolution of that thing. Let me just read you then one quote from Charles Darwin, and I'll end with this. It's from his autobiography. A man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God, in other words, him, he's an atheist, or a future existence with retribution and reward, that's heaven and hell, can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses or instincts which are the strongest, or seem to him the best ones. Do you know what that's called? Hedonism. Why do you think we're struggling in our culture with hedonism? Because you're just a machine. There's no free will. There's no conscious thought. You are a pre-programmed machine, and all of your reactions are just things you inherited from your fish and monkey ancestors that helped them to have babies. There is no spirit in the machine. Now, you older folks remember the Police, the rock group, the Police? Any of us grew up in the 80s? Well, they had an album called Ghosts in the Machine. We are spirits in the material world. Our spirits. You might have heard that on elevators now. All right. It's an old philosophical question. Is there a ghost in the machine, or are we just a machine? Well, the Darwinists have come out very clearly. Let me give you one more quote, and then I'll stop. One more quote from a man named Bill Provine, who recently died. He said this while he was dying of brain cancer. He's a professor at Cornell. He says, "Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. There are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There's no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain I'm going to be dead. That's the end for me. There's no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning for life, and no free will for humans either." That's called nihilism. Okay, I'm going to skip everything at the end here. I just pulled back the curtain. I showed you the philosophy behind the things we're struggling with. When we're talking to people, we're talking to nihilists and hedonists. That's why the conversation is so difficult. Now, you're being called as young Christians to address these things in our culture. And it's not easy, and we have those same temptations. You are strong enough to do this. You can, or you wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be being trained to do this. So this is literally my last slide. 1 Peter 3:15. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give a defense or an answer to every man that asks. Why is that King James there? Oh, because my talk has King James slides at the end, so I can slip in case I go to church that's King James only, and I saw 1 Peter 3:15. Okay, anyway, sorry. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. Modern translation might say gentleness and respect.